What should I do?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here present at our live seminar. So today, Dan Zeman, who is a principal investigator here at the University of Porto at Lab, is going to give us a talk about slurs and the lexicon. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and you can go ahead and present.
All good? Do we need to calibrate or anything? Okay, well, thanks, Jose, and all the others for organizing this. Thank you all for being here. Yes, so I'm new at this university, the Institute. Very happy to be here. I have a project funded by the FCT, which is actually this one. That's the title of the project, I think. Something like that, on that ballpark. So it's going to be for 6 years. Hopefully we have plenty of time to interact. I'm really looking forward to interacting with all of you. And so what I'm gonna do today is basically present my project a little bit. It's not gonna be much about, having arguments and arguing for a particular thesis. I just want to put forward the picture that I think is interesting. It has to do with slurs and lexical semantics and polysemy. And so I'm gonna basically tell you what I want to do in all the 6 years, and yeah, hopefully you're going to find this interesting. I also have an ulterior motive to talk to you today about this. I'm running, so part of my project is a seminar or a reading group that I promise to do every semester. And so I'm trying to convince you to participate in this reading group. It's going to be on slurs. We're going to take it easy. We're going to start with some introductory texts and build from there. If you're hopefully after the presentation your interest will increase, not decrease, in this type of expressions. If you want to participate, just let me know. You can find me on the university website, or also on the World Wide Web. Just shoot me an email, and I will be very happy to welcome as many of you as you are interested in doing this. All right. A last thing that I have to say before starting, I'm going to mention some slurs. This is part of the issue of mentioning slurs in academic talks, and generally, it's also one of the issues that people working on slurs worry about, right? Because they have this formidable potential to offend and produce harm, right? Many people nowadays advise caution. And so when it comes to academia, it used to be the case that people just were mentioning slurs left and right. So that, I think, should be a little bit more contained. So I will mention some slurs. My main example is going to be slurs from an old era, the German slur, the English slur for German people, Bosch. That pertains to, that comes from the First World War, when English people started calling Germans Bosch. But I also will mention a few other slurs, so I hope nobody will be offended. Yeah, this is important to say. Okay, and very last thing, I'm happy to be interrupted with clarificatory questions. Just raise your hand, or tell me if I speak too fast, or too slow, or too loud, or whatever, things like that. Okay. So here's what I want to do today. So I'm going to start with introducing slurs to you. I'm not sure how familiar you are all with this type of expression, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the function, the characteristics, uses, and then mention some theories of slurs to kind of situate better what I want to do. Then I'm going to talk to you about polysemy, and I present very briefly two views. I'm going to insist on one of them, which is called rich-lexicon. Then I'm going to show how that can be applied to slurs, right? That's basically the contribution of the project and the work that I've done before. Apply that kind of framework to slurs, and then see whether that framework can be applied to other types of expressions, okay? And so I'm going to start with this observation that slurs can be found in many of the world's languages, including sign languages. I don't know why, well, I'm always surprised that they are in sign languages, but I shouldn't be, because the languages are any other languages. And of course, slurring can happen on does happen, in fact, on the basis of race, sexual orientation, gender, nationality, ethnicity, disability, character, personality, all, all the traits that humans possess, essentially or not, have been prone to slurring, right? And so from this point of view, humans have this amazing creative capacity, for good or for worse, I guess. And so there's not a agreed upon definition of slurs, and there might be issues about which words count as slurs or not. But this definition that I'm going to read now is kind of it's widely agreed that that kind of captures the essence of slurs, right? And that it does it by specifying the function they have. So slurs function to derogate or dehumanize. They function to signal that the targets are unworthy of equal standing or for respect as persons, that they are inferior as persons. Okay, this comes from philosopher Robin Jeshen in a paper a while back. So because of that, you can see they target both groups and individuals, and the latter they target via group membership. So group membership is really important here when it comes to slurs. And again, because they do that, they have the social dimension, they also have a moral and legal dimension as well. That is, they produce harm. And of course, the harm of slurs has been amply documented. So you might think that I'm exaggerating, right? Not all users of slurs take their targets to be inferior and so on and so forth, and that's certainly true. But sadly, it's not an exaggeration, so the pernicious role of slurs has been amply documented. I'm just going to give you some pointers. This is very depressing stuff. We don't have to, insist on that, but it's important to stress, right? So there's this famous paper by Lynn Tarrell, Genocidal Language Games, in which she studies the Rwandan genocide from 1994, and she conclusively shows, I think, that use of slurs and other words like snakes or cockroaches have led to deadly violence, okay? So there's been a massacre between two populations. Also, they are shown to play a role in aiding dehumanization in various historical epochs. The work of David Livingstone Smith here is very relevant. He has a bunch of books on that, Less Than Human, on inhumanity, making monsters. They're very fascinating reads, but as I said, they paint a horrible picture of humanity. Not so dramatic, but not less important, there is a bunch of empirical studies that have shown that slurs are detrimental to the targets, right? So they can lead to internalization of negative attitudes and associations. They can lead to feelings of alienation and exclusion that decrease self-assuredness and self-esteem, and also lead to stereotype threat. Stereotype threat is a interesting kind of phenomenon. People who have been stereotyped as being a certain way, let's say, bad at maths, when they're in an exam, in a maths exam, they perform badly because they're afraid of the stereotype, even if they have the capacity required to pass those tests and so on. So that's like a very insidious kind of like horrible thing. But as I said, not all users of slurs are like this. So let's jump back to philosophy of language and semantics. So why are they interesting? So everybody agrees they have this social dimension. Why are they interesting for semantics though? Why they are, because most people think that they have two aspects, right? A descriptive aspect and an evaluative aspect. They refer to or single out a particular group, that's the descriptive aspect. And also they convey a negative attitude towards the members of the group because of being member of those groups, right? And so because of this focus on being a member, I already mentioned this, of a group, right? Slurs differ from other pejoratives like, this shouldn't be here. So jerk or asshole or something like that. They also refer to people, but there's no independently identified group of assholes. It's just a group of assholes, right? But we don't have other ways of identifying them. Whereas when it comes to slurs, for most of them, there's like such a way. And so I'm going to give you an example in a second. So the main issue in linguistics and philosophy of language has been the issue of how to capture the derogatory character of slurs. And just to exemplify what I said, so here I'm using this word that I mentioned. If somebody says Hans is a Bosch, the descriptive aspect of that is that Hans is German, right? You cannot be a Bosch without being a German, unless people speak metaphorically. And we're going to get to that as well. And there's this evaluative aspect that Hans is contemptible because of being German, right? So these are the two aspects here. And you can see that they're both important because they determine the felicity conditions of users of Bosch, right? So if I say about the French person that's a Bosch, I'm committing some kind of mistake, which is at the descriptive level, right? But also if I say that Hans is a Bosch and Hans is German, but I don't have this contempt attitude or negative attitude or evaluation about Hans, then there's also some kind of a different kind of mistake that I'm making, right? So these are these two dimensions that people have pointed out that come up with slurs. And that's, that's the challenge to be faced. A lot of work has gone into kind of seeing what are the essential features or characteristics of slurs. There are many of them. I'm going to mention these three. So this is what I call, these are my terms. They're known in the literature by many other terms. So one is resilience. The derogatory character of slurs doesn't disappear when embedded in various linguistic constructions. That's more or less agreed upon nowadays. Also, there's derogatory variability. Certain slurs are more derogatory than others. And finally, independence, which I think is very important. Their derogatory character doesn't depend on the intentions, beliefs, or attitudes of the speakers, right? Okay, so I'm going to exemplify this a little bit. So we already seen Hans is a Bosch, right? That's derogatory. But it turns out that even if you say Hans is not a Bosch, John said that Hans is a Bosch, Mary thinks that Hans is a Bosch. If Hans is a Bosch, we shouldn't invite him for dinner. They also have this thing, right? They also manage to derogate, despite the fact that they are somehow embedded in a lot of linguistic material. So in the first you have negation, and the second you have a speech report and a belief report, and then here you have a conditional, right? So that people have noted that, well, despite being embedded in linguistic material, the kind of derogatory character scopes out, as it were, right? This is different than other expressions. If I say, I don't know, Tim believes that the earth is flat, I myself, I'm not committing to anything, right? I'm just reporting that a thought that Tim has, falsely. All right, so that's resilience, right? Derogatory variability, this can vary between groups or the same group, right? There's also a synchronic dimension, words that have been slurs are not considered slurs nowadays, and the other way around. You can have two slurs that refer to the same target, right? Bosch versus crowd. Apologies for that. That's probably more, that has a stronger sting than Bosch, right? And then referring to different target groups, nerd versus fag. Apologies for both of them. It's my impression that nerd is not so, doesn't have such a strong sting. Of course, this has to be considered in a certain community at a certain time, right? Not for everybody, because that's, depends on the language and the context and so on and so forth. And then finally, independence. So the intentions, attitudes, and beliefs of the speakers are irrelevant, despite there are some views that think like, well, no, this is what this is how slur functions. They're like really context dependent, and they depend on the intentions of the speakers. I think that view is not accepted nowadays so much. But to kind of like fix the idea, I would like to ask you to consider the following. So if somebody is a slur without knowing that it's a slur, or without wanting to derogate, they still manage to derogate, right, the target group. So imagine yourself hearing somebody utter a horrible slur, right? And that somebody might be a child, for example, right? They don't know what they're talking, they just got the parents. They got the word from the parents. But you still, there's something that you feel that has gone awry there, right? And of course, there's the issue of being blameworthy. We're not going to blame the child, right? Because we know that the child didn't know better. But that's a different matter, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you should blame that person. But the point remains that the slur manages to derogate, right? Despite the speaker's intentions and beliefs. And so here, I think pertinent is this distinction between derogatory character and offensiveness. One is an aspect of an expression's meaning, right? We're talking about expression, stuff that is encapsulated in the meaning and conventionally so, right? And then being offended is a mental state of person. And they usually go hand in hand, but they can come apart, obviously. And I think the arguments here are very simple. So no one in the KKK is offended by the N-word, right? Still, it is, you won't say that it's not a slur, right? And also, one can be offended by any non-slur word, right? That shows that offensiveness and derogatoriness come apart, right? So yeah, that's it. I'm not going to insist much on this. I want to move to, again, feel free to interrupt me with questions if you want, or tell me if I should move quicker or slower and so on and so forth. Okay, I want to move to the types of uses of slurs which I think are more interesting. So two broad categories: derogatory uses, also known as weapon uses, and non-derogatory uses, non-weapon uses, okay? The derogatory ones here, it's kind of simple, right? Those are the closest to fulfilling the main function of slurs. Remember this definition that I gave you from Robin Jeshen. And you find, let's call them standard derogatory. John is a Bosch, you're a Bosch, hey Bosch. There might be interesting differences between these. Here you're predicating a slur. Here you're calling someone a slur. So might be subtle differences between the speech acts that you make doing this, but no, I'm going to bracket all those. Also, there's what could be called internalized derogatory use, when you yourself apply, or to members of your group, you apply a slur, right? So I'm not sure if that's a separate category. They seem to kind of function the same, but they might raise some interesting issues, okay? So that's the derogatory uses. Well, non-derogatory uses. So obviously they can be used without derogating or with the intention of righting some wrongs, okay? And I'm gonna give you examples of 4 of these, and then I have 2 more. It's gonna be a lot of uses, all right? Well, appropriated uses are the most discussed in the literature. They're also very interesting, right? Some slurs have undergone or are currently undergoing the transformation from expressing a negative relation of the target group to expressing a positive one, prompted by members of the target group themselves, right? So that's the important bit. Examples of successful appropriation: queer, for example, is always given as the main example. That kind of goes back to the chant that the queer nation had in the 60s. We're here with queer, get used to it. Also, this is the name of the journal called Queer Studies. So yeah, that's mainly considered the most successful example of appropriation. The N-word as well, in hip-hop among members of the same family or community and so on and so forth. Interestingly, of course, the permissibility of out-group use. So if you're not part of the target group, right, that is something that varies, right? And so here, queer is kind of meant by the community, by the target community, to be used by anyone in a positive sense. Things are different when it comes to N-word. Not anybody can say the N-word, right? It's mostly reduced to uses within the community, right? But that's, that doesn't mean it's not appropriate. It's just like there's this difference between who has the permission, so to speak, to use the word. There are many types of appropriate uses. 2 have been more prominent in the literature. Appropriation as serving a political goal, right? So, with queer, that's kind of clear. Activists and members of subordinate groups aim to change the perception of the group in order to fight oppression. And so I'm using here this phrase that my colleague Mihaela Popa-Wyatt uses: taking back control of words, right? You basically take from the oppressor the means of, one of the means by which they manage to oppress you or discriminate you and so on and so forth, by changing the meaning, right? I mean, that's part of the larger process. It's not only that, right? That's a whole discussion, but we're not going to get into that. And also there's this other sense which can be part of the same kind of endeavor, but need not. Appropriation expressing endearment, camaraderie, appreciation. And that happens a lot with the N-word, for example. Okay, another type of non-derogatory use is what has been called by Chris Hom non-derogatory, non-appropriated, or also they can be called corrective uses. Slurs can be used to correct someone who uses that slur to derogate. Institutions that treat Chinese as, here should be a slur for Chinese people, are racist, okay. Here the slur is not used in an appropriate manner because the person might not be from the Chinese community. But by saying this, you're making a point of pointing out that those institutions are racist, right? So that's your main goal in uttering something like that. There's also quotational didactical uses, like what I'm doing now here, right? So as I mentioned, not used. Remember the distinction that every student is taught in analytic philosophy, which can use and mention. In academic work, courts of law, newspapers, and so on and so forth. Humor, irony, I mean, that's a whole discussion that we had, right? Are those uses quoted? Are they used derogatorily or not? It's a very thorny issue. I'm kind of leaving it aside, but we can discuss about it if you want in the Q&A. And also I want to say that the permissibility of such uses varies between countries a lot. So I have this anecdote from someone that wanted to write an article for the New York Times, and they were told that you cannot mention the N-word. And they were like, no, I'm not going to mention the N-word. And then they were said, the reply was like, no, you cannot write the N-word, like the phrase the N-word, you cannot write that. So not only that the N-word is not permitted to mention, but the phrase the N-word is not permitted to mention. So that's kind of like, that varies. That has to do with a lot of cultural and contextual issues. All right, and finally, slurs can be used metaphorically. Whether successful or not, that depends on a lot of factors. So they can be applied, by which I mean that they can be applied to people who are not members of the target group based on some perceived similarity. There's this famous example here. So John Lennon and Yoko Ono had a song in the 70s, I guess, 60s. Woman is the N-word of the world. Of course, their intention wasn't to slur, right, to derogate. They wanted just to make a point about the situation of women in the world. This has fared really badly. It was aired once on the radio and was immediately put out because people protested a lot, right? So it really depends on, despite the intentions being there, it wasn't successful. But the point is that you can use them metaphorically in a presumably non-derogatory way. Well, by the way, all the claims that I make that this kind of use is non-derogatory, they can be challenged, right? That's not, I'm just telling you what people have thought at some point in time about these uses. All right. There's a second type of non-derogatory uses, which I think is the most interesting, and also the one that I think motivates the view that I have, okay? And so so while most non-derogatory uses, especially the appropriate ones, as we saw, aim to put a positive spin on a slur, some of them are simply use neutral. And here I have two types, right? They might in the end be the same. It's not entirely clear, but I'm going to go through this. So Lavelle Anderson has noted following work by Smitherman, the linguist working on African American language. Oh, sorry, keep touching this one. The N-word with a A at the end, right, can be used in certain contexts to mean friend, buddy, man. So he says the use of the N-word, commonly attributed to rappers, black comedians, and black youth, don't illuminate claims about the persistence and reality of racism, but are often used referentially in a friendly manner. And then he says there are a variety of uses black speakers employ with the N-word, some of them positive, some neutral, and some others negative. And of course, what I'm interested here is the neutral thing, right? And so that kind of relates to the earlier characterization by Smitherman as making generic neutral reference to African Americans, right? So I take this to be a neutral, as they themselves say. The idea here is not to resemanticize the word or to put a positive spin on it, it's just that they use it neutrally. And also, in my own work, I have, so I've done some work with Roma communities in Romania. So, and I found the following, so some ethnic slurs like Tsigan, roughly translated in English as gypsy, in Romanian and other languages from Eastern Europe are used by members of the target group as belonging to a certain, to identify as belonging to a certain ethnic group, okay? So it has this that's why I call it identificatory. And so I'm giving you a little bit of history of the word. I don't know if that's interesting to you. But I want to show you the data if I have time. Let me see how much I've spoken. The first part is really long, then it's going to be much smoother, okay? So bear with me. Also, if you want me to move on, just tell me. So I'm taking some data from this survey that has been made for a Romanian governmental report. And so they went and asked Roma ethnics several questions about their language use. And that's where I based this kind of claims from, okay? And so here's the type of question. They asked them, how do you usually refer to yourself and other Roma ethnics? 66 of the people interviewed said Tsigan, 30% said Rom. That's a word from the Romani language, right? That's a language different from Romanian. Just happens they sound the same, but the name of the language sounds the same. But that's the word that they have for gypsy, as it were. And so 66 said Tsigan, 30% said Rom. Even more interestingly, how do you refer to yourself and other Romanics in the Romani language, right? So not all the members of the Roma community speak Romani. But for those who speak, they ask this, and you still have the biggest portion being Tsigan, right? So that's the slur, right? And then you have 32 who use Rom, and then these others who don't speak. So that's very surprising, right? And finally, this is just a graph showing, so how offensive do you find the word Tsigan? This big chunk here is not at all, right? This kind of also big chunk is very offensive, and these are in the middle, right? So first of all, I want to point out that this is it's almost 40%, right? So a lot of the members of the community don't take this word to be offensive. And here you can compare it with slurs for other minorities in Romania. That's Jewish people, sorry, that's Hungarians, and this is Jewish people. And so here is a bit, it's significantly lower, right? The not offensive. And, if you look here, that's a lot. So, this kind of data are used to kind of like say that, well, this is a sui generis type of use. And it's not, well, I also have some arguments that it can be reduced to others. Yes, Tim?
Just curious, does that correlate with age at all?
With age? Ooh, I don't actually know. I'm sorry, I don't think they tested that. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think it's a factor. Damn, I keep. You're thinking, I mean yeah.
That maybe older people
Yeah.
find it more.
This is already all the studies from 2009, so I'm pretty sure things have changed a little bit in recent years, but I don't have data. I'm really dying to get more data, but I can't do it, and waiting for people to do the work for me. But yeah, thanks for the question. All right, so this is basically based on this kind of data. I postulated that there is this identificatory kind of use. I have verbal confirmation from people that I know in the area that happens in other countries, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Serbia, and so on and so forth. I don't know how the situation is here. I would really want to know from you. So Manela, you have a...
I will leave it to the end because we call it, we even use the same word, which is Tsigan.
Yeah.
We will talk about it.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
No, I'm very interested in this kind of data. All right, yeah. So, I'm not going to go through this. Bottom line is there is this neutral use, and I take it to be a neutral use, right? I don't think it's definitely not appropriated. It's not derogatory internalized. I mean, it could be, but that strikes me as psychologically and socially implausible, and so on and so forth, right? So, yeah. So now quickly, before moving to the second session, I want to mention that there are there are very, very many theories of slurs on the market. They can be grouped in two categories, semantic theories and pragmatic theories, as you would expect, right? And that's what happens basically with any kind of expression. The first situated derogatory element, the linguistics literal meaning of a slur, right? That's not surprising. And you can have one or two layers of meaning, or even three, according to some people. And then you have pragmatic theories which basically comply a lot of phenomena, right? So they kind of all situate the derogatory element at the level of pragmatics, and that could mean presuppositions, implicatures, societal taboos, the force of the speech act, right? It's not about the meaning, it's about the speech act that you make. Register, right? That goes back to Frege's notion of coloring, and social meaning, and so on and so forth. So that's a lot of variety here in theories of slurs. I'm not gonna, I mean, if you come to the reading group, you're gonna go to some of these theories. Some of them were very interesting. And so, but what I want to point out is that both these types of view have issues with non-derogatory uses, right? So, and the issue is this, so as we saw, as I hope it was clear, such uses create a challenge for these theories because they have to account for the change in meaning at whatever level they postulate, pragmatic semantics, so on and so forth. That occurs in these uses. So remember, the transition is from, endowing the slur with a negative attitude to a positive one in appropriated uses, and a negative to neutral one in referential and identificatory uses. And a lot, as I told you, a lot has been written about appropriated uses, but not so much about referential and identificatory uses, right? And so the people who have talked about appropriated uses, they have appealed both among semantic views and among pragmatic ones have appealed to ambiguity, right? By which I mean homonymy. I didn't put this on the slide, but ambiguity is kind of like umbrella term for two kinds of phenomena, homonymy and polysemy. Homonymy is the phenomenon whereby you have the same string of words, the same string of letters or sounds, and two completely different meanings that are unrelated. And usually people say bank as the financial institution and bank of the river. Maybe at some point they were connected because the financial institution was on the river, I'm not sure. But that's kind of like the main example, right? They shouldn't be connected. Whereas polysemy is this phenomenon when you have the same string of letters, the same sounds, two different senses, but they're related, right? And one easy example is, let's say, bottle, right? I drank the bottle, that means that you drink the stuff that's in the bottle. I broke the bottle, that means that you broke the container, right? You broke the glass, right? And so you can't drink the container, you can't break the contained stuff, right? So that's polysemy. In any case, so we're gonna go into detail about this in a minute. So the point here is that people have appealed to homonymy, right? And the most explicit formulation is here by Robin Jeshen. It's plausible that the term acquired a new meaning via the process of appropriation. On this analysis, queer became semantically ambiguous upon appropriation. Initially, it was non-ambiguous, its only linguistic standing as a slur, one whose derogatory capacity has been accounted for semantically. Later it came to have another conventional use, one that is non-pejorative, okay? So that's kind of like the most explicit formulation of this idea, right? I think ambiguity should be resisted. I think taking slurs to being ambiguous leaves an important part of the process of operation out, namely the connection between a slur and its history, right? So, in ambiguity, what is the same linguistic symbol amounts, in fact, to two distinct words, as I gave you the example of bank. But again, then you have people like Rappaport and Linterel, again, who say things like this. It is important to recognize that the power of appropriation comes in part from the fact that it's the same word that has been appropriated, right? If the words are different words, then you lose this connection, right? And Linterel puts it, I think, very nicely here when she says, it is the same word with the same history, but with a new future, right? So the fact that it's the same word, that's important, right, in the appropriation. And ambiguity, in the sense of homonymy, cannot get you that. Well, guess what? I think polysemy can get you that, right? So that's basically my main claim, that many slurs are polysemous, that is non-homonymous, right? Okay. So that was the first section. It took a lot of time. Sorry about that. But I'm good with time, yeah? All right. So this is going to go a little faster. So, all right. So my main claim is that slurs, or at least some of them, are polysemous. But of course, what is polysemy, right? There's a whole other discussion to be had what polysemy is. Well, polysemy has been mostly approached in lexical semantics, which is the branch of semantics that studies the structure of the meaning of individual words, right? Two broad types of theories coexist now in debate, rich lexicon theories and thin lexicon theories. And I put here some works that can be consulted if people are interested in that. So what are these two families of views? Well, according to the first rich lexicon theories, so that's a kind of the common claim that they make. A word's lexical entry comprises various dimensions of meaning, among which the one that an expression has in a certain context, they call it its sense, is selected, right? So you start from something big, and then that's the lexical entry of the whole world. Then in a certain context, you kind of shrink that, right, to express a particular meaning. And with thin lexicon theories, that's the opposite, right? A word lexical entry is basic, with the sense of a word in a certain context being constructed out of that basic meaning by using all kinds of things, like encyclopedic knowledge, contextual clues, and so on and so forth, or other ways of enriching it. So, you start with something very, very thin, maybe, according to some people, just a string of sounds or letters, right? And then based on what you know about this word and how it's used, you kind of get in a certain context to a specific meaning, right? So it's kind of like a different ways of, I want to make like a direction of fitting, but doesn't matter. But I mean, hopefully you get the basic idea, right? So why would you adopt the rich lexicon theory? Okay, there are many arguments for and against each of these. I won't discuss them here. This is part of the project, of course. But I just want to point out that people have thought that there's a bunch of achievements that lexical theorists have. So for example, providing an abstract account of word meaning, explaining coercion effects, right? Meaning shifts, logical metonymy, multidimensional predication, that's stuff like, you know, stone lion, right? They cannot be a stone lion, right? But people use this thing, the stone lion, right? So what's happening there? And so people have explained this kind of, the possibility of having this meaningfully saying things like that by adopting a rich lexicon theory. Also radical truth conditional variation, that's, you know, the famous Travis cases, right? Green means green leaves. Sorry, green leaves can mean in one context that the color, in other contexts can be that like it's a live thing, it's an alive thing. And also importantly, polysemy and co-predication, right? So that's, co-predication is the phenomenon whereby you say, I drank the bottle and then I broke it, right? You can't, that's not the same thing, right? You're predicating different attributes of different aspects of the word bottle, right? And in any case here, and for this project, I'm assuming that the rich lexicon theory is a better fit for slurs. And I don't actually have arguments. I'm just telling you that's what I'm doing, and hopefully at some point in these years, I will find better arguments than just saying that, you know, that's a good fit. All right, so let's go a little bit into details. There are a bunch of rich lexicon theories that one can have, and so I'm going to focus here on nouns. I want to start with that. I will rely on the framework. This is not really that important, but I'm relying on this framework provided by Guillermo del Pinal in a paper a while back that makes use of the notion of qualia, right? That has been one way for people in lexical semantics to express, to kind of put forward this framework. This is something that Ray Jackendorf has proposed, and he goes back to Aristotle's four causes. Yes, Aristotle. We talked about Aristotle before I started. So that's kind of the idea that the qualia is some minimal unit of information that kind of like captures an aspect of a meaning of a word, right? And I'm gonna show you what exactly they are. So main idea here is that the meaning of the word can be represented by a tuple consistent in extension, right, and a conceptual structure. And the conceptual structure is basically the important bit. This comprises a multitude of meaning dimensions, roughly corresponding to the stereotypes associated with the examples the words apply to. And they get selected as the sense of a particular word in a particular context. I already told you that, right? So let's see what are these meaning dimensions. So here's, you know, one way in which rich lexicon theorists of nouns have taken this conceptual structure to be. Well, so as I said, these are units of information, right? And they are kind of like independent in a sense. So information about what the they here refers to the objects that the word is applied to, right? So information about what the objects the word applies to are made of, or the parts, so let's call that the constitutive dimension. How they came, again, the objects, how they came to being, or the purpose of their creation, that's the agentive dimension. Their typical function, that's the telic function, telic dimension. Perception information about the objects referred to with the noun, that's the perceptual. And there might be more, right? So, but I'm gonna stop, I'm gonna just present you these four. So that's kind of the, let's see what I have here. So that's the, yeah, so let's see how it works. So book, this is the stuff about book, right? So perceptual, that's information about the shape, size, color of a particular book. Constitutive is like, you know, what is it made of, how it came to be, well, it has cover, it has pages. You know, that's for classic books. When we're talking about electronic books, then things differ a little bit. It's like pixels or whatever have you. Well, what's the, how it came to be? Sorry, constitutive is different. What it came to be, well, it has been printed, it has been written, or whatever you do with a PDF, I don't know what that is. And finally, the goal of a book is to entertain and to learn from, and so on and so forth, right? And so that's all the information that's comprised in the lexical entry of book. Now, if you have, so that's the, so I'm taking that to be, these people take this to be the, what I just showed you before, this whole stuff, right? Take that to be the literal meaning of a word with all its dimensions, right? All the dimensions are the literal meaning of the word, right? And in a particular context, some of them dimensions might be highlighted, some others will be put in the shadow, right? And so this is a process of selection. What exactly is that process of selection? How you conceive of it, that's an open issue. There's a lot of literature here. Again, during the project, I will go into these details and maybe see which one is better for slurs. For now, I'm just going to use these two placeholders. So I'm going to call foregrounding the operation when a certain meaning dimension is highlighted in the context. It comes to the fore, right? And backgrounding when it's taken out of the spotlight, right? So hopefully that's intuitive enough for you. And so let's go back to the book example. If I have a sentence like, this book is bound in leather, here what is important for understanding book is basically the constitutive dimension. Because now I'm talking about the physical exemplar of the book, right? I'm talking about, what this book means from a physical point of view. And that is that it has covers, has pages. Here what it happens that, bound in leather, in leather, sorry, not in leather. In leather, that refers to the way that the cover and the pages are put together, or something like that, right? In contrast, in a different context, say you have this sentence, this book has influenced the whole generation of thinkers. I mean, here the important bit is that, you think about the content of the book, right? And that's kind of like encoded in the telic dimension, because the content is the one that entertains, learns from. You could also have this could also mean that the book, the way it has been bound has influenced the whole generation of thinkers. But that's, that's not like the preferred kind of meaning. I mean, it could be, right? But then this other dimension would be foregrounded. And in this case, if you go for the normal interpretation, the telic dimension is foregrounded, okay? So that's basically the mechanism by which certain senses get selected in a certain context from this big chunk of information that has the literal meaning. That is the literal meaning of a word, okay? I have here a slide about the semantics pragmatics divide. I don't know if that's interesting to you. It seems that these lexical theories inhabit the borderlands, right? They're both pragmatic and semantic in a certain sense, right? They're semantic because the lexical meaning of a word is its semantic meaning, which is this long thingy, this long list of dimensions. And that's the meaning that is grasped by speaker of a language when they know a word, right? And then it's also pragmatic because a word can have different sense and different contexts, and that's something that pertains to the use of the word, okay? Okay, so that's the theory, right? That's the kind of like the bare bones of the theory of the framework that I think is interesting and could be applied to slurs. And I want to show you how it can be applied to slurs, all right? So the most important thing that you have to do if you want to apply it to slurs is to introduce this in the conceptual structure, right? In this dimension of meaning, a new dimension, which is an evaluative dimension. Let's call it evaluative, not very imaginative. But that's the dimension that's going to be responsible for the slur's derogatory character. How exactly to conceive of this is again an open issue. At the moment, I'm very neutral about this. I mean, in the project, I hope to kind of make progress in solving this issue. But the idea, as before with book, is that the literal meaning of slur is the rich lexical configuration that comprises all meaning dimensions, right? So we will have something like this, right? So we're keeping some of the previous ones because they're nouns as well, right? So these, because slurs are applied to people, the constitutive is like what people are made of, how they came to be, they're born, right? And then depending on, so they have a certain appearance and so on and so forth. And now you put this evaluative stuff, right? So negative evaluation based on stereotypes or ideology. That's where that's where the meat is in a way, right? That's what accounts for the derogatory character, because you have a negative evaluation built into the semantics, into the linguistic meaning. And of course here I replaced origin with telic, because again we're talking about people and groups. It's a bit, I don't think it makes much sense to ask about the telos of a group. I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes sense to ask about, the provenance, the history, the social standing of that group. So that kind of information, it's built into this new dimension that I call origin, okay? So that's, this is very rough, and probably it has to be developed a lot, and maybe some of these will disappear at the end of the inquiry. But like that's the main idea that a rich lexical view of slurs would give you about the meaning of a slur, okay? So all these dimensions are the lexical meaning of a slur, okay? So now let's see how it works a little bit with the users, right? Because that's the interesting part. Like, how do they? Well, if a slur is used in a derogatory way, what happens here is that basically the evaluative dimension is foregrounded, right? That's what you want to stress. You want to say, you want to, convey your main goal when you use a slur derogatorily is to convey this negative evaluation, right? And you might also select some others, right? Because you need to have this information because to fix who's the group that they're attacking as well, right? So you need maybe some information from here. But the important bit is that the evaluative dimension is the one that is foregrounded, right? And all the others, or most of the others, are backgrounded. But now if you take a slur that's yours in an identificatory way, remember the story with Tsigan that I told you, there the evaluative dimension kind of gets taken back, right? It's not, so when members of the Roma community use Tsigan to self-identify as being part of a certain ethnic group, they don't evaluate themselves, right? It's a neutral use again. What happens here instead is that this kind of information comes to the foreground, right? It's important, what you're conveying is basically that they belong to a group that has a certain provenance, history, and social standing, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of, this is how to account for these different uses, right? I hope this is intuitive enough. Well, what about appropriated uses, right? Remember that we talked about that. As we saw in this, slur is used with a positive evaluation instead of a negative one. But so how do you get to this change? Well, here I'm appealing to this notion of valence, right? That's a notion that has been used in connection to evaluative discourse a lot by people like Danka Cepolaro and Isidora Stojanovic, among others. So that's construed as a function from a context C to the type of evaluation, positive or negative and relevant in C, right? So what you're going to have, so this is kind of a correction of the view. It's not that the evaluative just gives you the negative additive. It gives you, valence C, and then you fill in, depending on context, the evaluation, right? So it's a function of, from a context to a type of evaluation, right? And so when you have derogatory uses, that's going to be a negative. The valence is going to be negative, right? So you're going to have a negative evaluation. And when you have appropriated uses, that's going to be a positive evaluation, okay? It's all a function of the context. Feel free to ask questions. I know this is very confusing. All right, I think I have one more slide about this. So I think it, yes? Yes?
No, I was thinking, why you want to distinguish if it's anomia or
Homonymy, yeah.
or polysemic? If can be this both, I think, the slurs, because I think when you use about the meaning of word depends on the context. Doesn't matter if it's homonymy or polysemy. Why you want to bring this
Yes.
to the table?
Right, so first of all, it does matter because, there's been evidence that homonymous words and polysemous words are computed differently. They are, so the brain goes, oh, this is a homonymous word, now I have to search for all these senses, and based on cues from the context, I have to select one of them. That's homonymy. In polysemy, the brain goes like, oh, I know this word, it can mean this and this and this, and in this context, I go directly to that. So it has been pointed out that the speed of the process in polysemy is much faster than in processing polysemous words. So the brain does that much faster than in processing homonymy, right? So that's one thing. There's a lot of evidence, right? There's a lot of cogsi and psychological evidence that's happening. Then the other thing is, well, because I think that, as I said, I have this argument against taking slurs to be homonymous in appropriation. If you just go with that, there's no connection between the two words. And in the process of appropriation, there has to be a connection because it's important to relate what you're doing to what happened in the past, right? So, a slur has been used, let's say, to oppress a certain group. It's not enough to say like, hey, we're going to use this word. We're going to use the same word, but with a positive thing. I mean, that might happen, right? But that's not, well, it's important it's the same word that my oppressors have used, that I'm resemanticizing, because that's the way that's one way to take power out of their hands, right? By stealing their word, stealing their word from in their sense and giving it a different sense, right? But it's the same word. That's important, right? So yeah, that's the answer to your question. That's what I want polysemy, and not.
Word can be negative or positive.
Yeah, but that's not. Well, I mean, that could be homonymy, but that's not the explanation that I want, right? Does that answer, kind of?
Social use that word that is agreed between different communities in the same society.
Yeah,
That use.
I think the difference here, important for Zeman maybe, is that in anonymity you don't have the same words. They have the same shape.
They just look the same, yeah.
They just have the same, it's an arbitrary connection between the word and the way it looks or sounds. But then in polysemy you have just one word with different meanings attached.
So imagine that,
The
sorry.
important difference here.
I understand
Yeah,
what the two words mean, but I don't understand the connection with slurs. I don't know what happened.
Well, I'm thinking positive and negative. Well, okay, positive attitude gives you one meaning, and negative attitude gives you another meaning. I mean, it's a weird sense of meaning, I give you that, I grant that. But because here we're dealing with evaluations, and the broader picture is like, you have to capture semantically this evaluation, right? So then it really the valence really matters, it positives and negatives, and it's so much so that it gives you different meanings, right? And that's this is kind of like, you can see in use, right? If I'm calling you a slur, it really depends what meaning I'm using for our, depending on our relationship, depending on power relations and so on and so forth. I mean, I didn't go into that, but that's a whole story behind it, right? So, yeah, I don't know what else, what else to say.
Just a small.
Yes.
I don't know if you can make this point stronger, pointing out that also in the other way around it makes sense to assume it's the same word. So sometimes a word is introduced as a neutral word, also with the function of being a neutral word, and then assumes starts being used as a slur, and it seems obvious, right? In that case, it has to be the same
exactly.
word, and we are, so maybe consider also this the contrary kind of evolution.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
I remember many words for that has been introduced in Italian, for instance, for disabled people. With you always have the sense the word we're now using is offensive, is not, so we need a new one introduced in institutional content, and after 2 years it was it was replaced by another one, and so on. That's they say word all the time.
That's a fair point. Does that make sense to you, Samara?
Yeah, I think I am.
Thanks, Mattia.
More my imagination,
Right. I mean, I guess the point is like, imagine that I'm from the Roma community in Romania, and I go like, oh, guess what? Here's a way to refer to ourselves. Țigan. It's a new word, I just made it up. I'm like, well, that's not appropriation. You haven't appropriated the word that the Bigots use.
It cannot be homonym because it cannot be some two different meanings. That's what you...
It can be, but they're unrelated.
Yeah.
Right. So the connection between the changed meanings, both in this case and the case that Mattia mentioned, right? You go the other way around. So it has to be there, right? Because if these people would say like, oh, I want to slur disabled people, here's a word for you, and you take the word that disabled people use, that's like completely silly. Right? I mean, and it's not the same word, right? It has to be the same word. All right, okay. So I'm gonna, I think I have two more things about this. I wanted to say that the referential uses are accounted for by foreground and adjunctive. This is already, a question of detail. Here I'm just bragging about the capacity of the framework to account for all the uses. I mean, this is still a bit tentative. I don't have a final answer, but I think an answer can be given. Referential uses, remember are those uses in which, for the N word, you can just say it and mean like friend or body or human being or something like that. And so that I account for by foreground adjunctive, right? The type of being that this people, the kind of being that people are, right? And then metaphorical uses are accounted for by backgrounding origin and foregrounding whichever dimension is closer to the aspect of the slur's meaning that is used to base the metaphor on, right? So we have, so you know, the former president, the Romanian president, a former Romanian president has been caught calling a journalist stinky gypsy or something like that, and has been fined and so on and so forth. But that's so the person wasn't from the Roma community, so that's a metaphorical use. But of course, they, you know, what he cared wasn't about the origin dimension, wasn't about, you know, the provenance of the person or the social standing or the group they belong to. They used this, they used gypsy they used Tsigan in a metaphorical way, latching on whatever stereotypes or what's the word? Ideologies, stereotypes basically, stereotypical traits that Roma people are taken to have. All right.
So
Okay.
it wasn't a case like a dog whistle?
No, I don't think it's a dog whistle. No. I mean, it's much more open than that.
Oh.
Yeah. All right, and this is again bragging about how it accounts for the characteristic of slurs that I mentioned. I'm not going to go through this. They're very tentative explanations. We can discuss about it. Okay, I want to go for the reminder. Can I take 5 more minutes? Is that good? Oof. All right, so the further applications, right? So I have worked on slurs so far. I came up with this view. I think slurs are polysemous, and I think polysemy has to be can be explained by adopting a rich-lexicon theory. But there are other evaluative expressions in the language that are similar to slurs in certain ways that I'm going to tell you. And I think the framework can be applied to those, right? So that's kind of like work for the 4th and the 5th year or the 6th year of the project. So a lot can change. But here is what I have in mind. Okay, so dual character expressions. These are expressions for which presumably there is a normative dimension surrounding them, in the sense that, you know, you have to fulfill certain conditions that are given by norms of society to count as such. So father, mother, scientist, professor, all kinds of vocational terms are like this. And by this I mean, you know, anybody can be a biological father, but not anybody can be like a proper father, right? Meaning that for you to be a father or a mother, you have to do certain things besides just creating this human being. You have to nurture them, you have to support them, and so on and so forth, right? So that's kind of given by the norms of society that we live in. Same for professor, right? There's a sense of professor in which anybody who has a contract with the university and teaches is a professor, but you know, there's professors that have influenced your life, and they have done something more than just like being there and giving their classes, right? That's kind of the sense that these dual character expressions kind of try to bring out, right? Then you have evaluatives like predicates of taste and tasty, fun, aesthetic adjectives, moral terms, and so on and so forth. They're obviously evaluative. A subclass of that is stick terms, right? They are notorious for having, you know, a descriptive sense, descriptive aspect, and also an evaluative one. A lot of people have worked on these, balanced, courageous. And then finally we have expressives, which are really weird expressions, I think. There's this famous manuscript of Kaplan's called On the meaning of oops and ouch, right? So expressions like that, but also things like damn, jerk, asshole, and so on and so forth. And again, there's a lot of literature, right? And so you know, what they have in common with slurs on the surface is that they have these two aspects that have been observed, right? Descriptive and evaluative, almost all of them. There are also very important differences too. So one general difference between these expressions and slurs is that only the latter apply to an independently identified group, which is sometimes called which can be referred to by what is called the neuter counterpart of the slur. So remember, when I introduced slurs, I told you that it's really important. There's a group behind the slur, right, that is targeted. That doesn't happen with most of these other expressions, right? And I gave you the example of asshole, right? There's no particular group independently identifiable that is the group of assholes. It's just, you know, some people have are assholes. And then there's also individual differences. I already mentioned that the dual character expression have a normative aspect rather than an evaluative one. There might be slight differences there. And many expressives seem to merely express evaluation, don't have a descriptive aspect. That's also a difference. But despite of that, there's also obvious similarities, and I'm going to give you two, right? One is what I call inverted valence uses. So many of the expressions listed can be used with a different valence than the one usually used or linguistically encoded, just like when slurs are used positively in appropriation, okay? So that's the thing that happens with slurs, and I think happens with these other expressions too. So dual character expressions, for example, might be used with an inverted valence in context in which different societal norms are in place. In our society, being a father in this normative sense means that you have to do all these other things besides just contributing to the existence of this human being. You have to, nurture them and so on and so forth. But this might be different, right? It might be that, certain, maybe, I don't know what would be an example, but maybe in societies in which all this is considered to fall on the mother side, it's a bad thing to be nurturing towards your kid or something like that, right? I mean, that's not so far. It's not necessarily so far from this society, but that's the idea, right? So you can have a completely different change in valence, right, in the attitude. Evaluatives and tick terms can be used with an inverted valence by people adopting, let's call them unorthodox perspectives, right? So, if I'm a God kid, I'm going to like all the stuff that non-God people don't like, right? All the weird stuff, all the, queer stuff in a sense. And so, this is also something that is encoded in certain words. So sick is now used, sick, should have a positive evaluation, should have a negative evaluation, because it's a negative thing to be sick. But people use it like for good things, like this is so sick. It's kind of like slang and jargon. Wicked, the same, right? Wicked supposed to be something bad, or used to be something bad when it was related to witchcraft and so on and so forth. And finally, expressives can convey both positive and negative feelings, right? You can say, damn, this paper by, my students are amazing or something like that. But they also can say, damn, I just hit my foot or something. So that's pretty much common sense, I think. And also importantly, many of these expressions listed can be used neutrally, just like when slurs are used referentially or in an identificatory manner, right? Remember all the stuff that I told you about Anderson and my own work. And so I think here it's actually even simpler. So neutral uses of dual character expressions are simply the descriptive ones, right? I think father, when you use father as biological father, that's just a neutral use of the word, right? Descriptive neutral, right? For tick terms, neutral uses correspond to descriptive uses. So balanced, for example, can be used as merely targeting a painting's form without evaluating it. Usually when you say something is balanced, or if you say somebody's courageous, you describe in a certain way, but you also bestow a positive evaluation. But again, that's not necessarily the case, right? So you can use balanced, or you can say somebody was courageous and not really condone this, just be neutral about it. There is interesting work by Isadora Stoyanovich and Elsie Kaiser. So they talk about evaluatives. They call them middling adjectives, simple, surprising, average. They think those to be, neither positive nor negative in a certain context, right? So there is an evaluation, but it's a very meager one. It's kind of like very reduced, almost zero. And finally, upon repeated use, I think expressives can lose their sting. We get to use ouch without being in pain, right? Or asshole to refer to someone familiar without necessarily conveying either a positive or negative attitude, right? So I think these are interesting similarities, which to my mind, they mandate testing the hypothesis that such terms are polysemous. And if so, the rich-lexicon framework sketched might be a good fit. Of course, there's a lot of work that has to be done because some of them are not nouns or adjectives. And so that is something that I have to explore. And ultimately, the hypothesis framework might apply to the entire evaluative sphere. That's the big claim that I'm making. I'm not that sure about it, but ask me at the end of the project. Let's see if I still hold this view. So I'm going to stop here. I have a bunch of more things like this, but we don't need to go into that, right? This is just showing how you would apply the rich lexicon view to those expressions. I'm just going to leave you with a summary here. I'm going to stop, and thank you so much for listening to me for so long.
Thank you so much and for...
Yeah, sorry for going way over time.
No problem. We still have plenty of time for discussion. Thank you for your interesting and engaging presentation. So,
Sorry, I
Go
will
ahead.
start.
You can
I will
just
have to
read
leave
it.
soon. So I will just, I would have a lot of questions, and I hope that we have time to talk
Yes.
about this then. But I think that I will just use one, which is the one that struck me more narrative. I kind of got lost when you talked about qualia.
Oh,
As a like a starting point for your own construction of the project.
Yep.
Mainly considering that you are looking for something that, and this is connected to another question, so I will use it this difference between thin and rich lexicon
Yep.
theories. Why not think, is it possible to think about them as a distinction between, minimalist and contextualist views of language use? Say, because you have the meaning of the word in a minimalist view, you have something like a meaning of a word which is fixed, and then you build upon it. And in a contextualist, like a radical contextualist view, you would have no meaning at all in a word, but only in the context. So I was a bit confused about this introduction of qualia, which is completely out of any consideration of this distinction between a word having a meaning in itself and a word not having a meaning and you having to build it. This is just...
yeah,
So,
thanks.
about the Zeman, there is a big community here in Portugal, and I think that it would be an very, very interesting thing to do here, to look at this community and how they talk and how they have...
Give me the context. Give me the context.
They have been, I don't know if any of us here is one coming from the community. Anyone? No, they are immigrants. They are nowhere, so they are really like minority,
Right.
though they are a lot in number. So
Right.
this is something that.
But there must be activists and people from the community who are.
Sorry.
There must be activists and people from the community
There
who
are
are.
some, but they're all. They're. I think for me they are the biggest minority in Portugal and maybe in Europe. I don't know. So they are kind of invisible in existing academia. This is just something that I would say.
Yeah. Okay. No, definitely. I would be very interested to get in contact with the members of the community or people working on
I hope
the.
I can help you.
That will be amazing. That will be amazing. I mean, I'm trying to do this for a while and not with so much success in other parts of the world. But never mind. Yeah. So hopefully it will work out. Okay. Back to this question about qualia. So yeah, here I should have said a bit more what I mean by qualia. And so I guess what Jakendorf has in mind is what I actually said. So units of kind of like units of information of the same kind of type or related to a certain aspect, right? So yeah. So information about what the object are made of, right? So certain objects are made of certain parts, right? That other objects are not made of, right? So if you're talking about human beings, then it's like limbs, head, whatever. And cars are completely different, and tables again are completely different, and so on and so forth. So that's the type of information that is encoded, and supposedly that's something that people. I mean, that might be a contentious issue, but like that's something that people know when they use the word, maybe not explicitly. I mean, that's an issue. I agree. That is an issue.
It's a very contentious issue.
Right.
And I think my question was more: do you need to go there to build your?
I mean, this. Okay, so.
To deal with this such a contentious, right?
I mean, because it's a rich lexicon. Well, I don't think it's that contentious, but anyway. So it's a rich lexicon view. It has to comprise some chunks of information, right? Because otherwise, it's not a rich lexicon view. Okay. from the types of information that you could put in. Because note, I'm not putting stereotypes in the. So stereotypes are not part of the meaning, according to my view, right? Of the lexical entry. Stereotypes are, that's a lot of information there. It varies widely and so on and so forth. It's just, the negative evaluation, the pure evaluation that is part of the meaning, right? So stereotypes are not. In this view differs from two other views that I haven't discussed, but like there's views who think that, the meaning of a slur is all the information that you get from the stereotypes. So there's like a huge list of stuff, right? So in comparison to those views, my view is pretty minimal, I would say. And that's because of the qualia stuff, right? So that's why I want to have qualia, right? Because I need to, yes.
I just want to float the possibility, maybe this explains the question. Is it possible that this is a homonymy between a technical sense of the term qualia that Jackendorf is introducing and the more common philosophical sense of qualia, meaning the felt phenomenal?
Oh, it's completely different. Sorry, is that what you asked? No, it has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
No, it's absolutely nothing to do with that, sorry.
Beautiful irony.
It's qualia, I cannot think of.
Right, but I mean,
Not in this literature, of course.
yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that. No, it's a.
But still, I find it some okay, but
No, it's nothing to do with that. It's absolutely nothing to do with that. Sorry, yeah. Thanks, Tim, for. I was going on and on. No, yeah, so it's an unfortunate accident that they use the same term, but it's not. I don't know.
now we have this.
No, it is. Let's keep it like that. But I think your question about context, how this fares in relation to contextualism, minimalism, radical contextualism, I mean, that's a very interesting one. I mean, I take this view to the view that I want to have. It is contextualist in the sense that you get to have different meanings, senses actually, selected of the word, selected in different contexts, right? But it's not that it starts, so the mechanism is a little bit different, right? You start from something big and then you shrink it, right? Whereas we have in a usual contextualist view, not radical, but like a usual contextualist view, you have something that is given in the meaning of the word, and it's mostly instructions to go to the context and pick up something like that. I. Well, what's the meaning of I? Well, it's not individual people. It's just like go to the context and see who's the speaker. The meaning of now. The meaning of tall, right? What's the meaning of tall? Well, go to the context and see what's the standard, what's the threshold or something like that. Those are instructions that are related to, the character, as Kaplan called it, of this word. So that's not a rich lexicon structure. Sorry, that's not a rich lexicon structure. That's just, some instruction that are the word, a certain level of the meaning of the word encapsulates that allows you to pick up different individuals or different things in a context. So I take these to be slightly different, right? But
still is a little bit mentalist, this idea of rich.
Mentalist. Well, these are conceptual structures. Oh, no, forget about the qualia. No, qualia. Not those qualia. But it is mentalist.
Even without those qualia?
It is mentalist. Well, I mean, they're conceptual structures. Yes, they're conceptual structures. So, yeah, I mean, you can tell me why you think that's bad, but...
Well, not now.
No, not now, right. We have 6 years. But, that is an assumption of the framework. I think that's true, yeah. But not in the qualia sense. Sorry. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dan. I think this just follows up on what Marianne was asking, maybe in a different way. I don't know the rich versus thin lexicon. I know some of the thin lexicon stuff just from the semantics pragmatics boundary stuff, but could you explain what makes the rich lexicon rich? Because it seems to me that if it's just the category types, agentive, things like that, unpopular, like unsaturated, right?
Yeah.
Then that's pretty thin, right? We would expect even a thin lexicon theory to give you some very, very broad sortal kinds of category information that would tell you how to populate the meaning on the basis of context, right? So the thin lexicon theory doesn't tell you, make up whatever you want based on context. It tells you fill in whatever is appropriate into these categories. But if it isn't that, if it's more, actually we want to go a little further down in the tree and start filling in some of the more fine-grained properties of those categories, that would be richer. But then I would, I mean, and again, who cares what I'm worried about, but I would start to worry then that it would lend itself to a more idiolectical, right? The richer it gets, the greater the chances that different speakers are associating different fine-grained properties with what's going on. And then it's not clear that you get the model of pruning away, right? The comprehension or uptake consists in pruning away from some pre-agreed lexicon, but rather you're starting to sample this kind of gray area of what may or may not be shared. So this isn't an objection. I just want to make sure I understand the thin versus thick distinction.
Yeah, no, great, thanks. That's a great question. So I think my honest answer is I don't know it either, and hopefully I will very soon. But my idea was, well, so one extreme view that I know is the view that Robin Karsten holds for the moment, which is, you know, kind of like the super radical contextualist. We just have a string of words, and maybe the information or sounds and the information that we get, so not, you know, the information that we get out of that, it's maybe it's a verb or it's a noun. And that's all we got from the very little thing. And then, of course, because we live in the world and we have used this word, we know in which context it's used, we know in what situations and so on and so forth, what we want to say. And so that we recover all of that from the encyclopedic knowledge, or knowledge of how the word was used and about the world and so on and so forth. And so that's how you get to these enriched senses, right? Now, of course, you know, I guess here an important bit to clarify is like what is encoded in the word and what comes from this non-encoded stuff like encyclopedic knowledge. And, you know, as all of you know, I'm sure, that's a notoriously hard question to answer, right? So I don't have an answer on that, but, you know, the idea that you know, these things are encoded, that helps, right? So with slurs, if you go to a dictionary, you will see, it's fine. You will see that it's mentioned there that that's a word used derogatorily towards group blah, blah. So you know, I mean, I take the dictionary to be pretty reliable. So so the evaluative dimension is encoded. It's not, you know, let's say it's not word knowledge, or at least, you know, from, yeah. So I think that's pretty sure. Now when it comes to the other stuff, right? So I mean, these qualia things, there are mostly, I think the idea behind the view is that, you know, just go to the most basic units information then you could get about objects that are referred with a certain word, and, you know, those constitute the meaning of the word. The fact that we use slurs for people, I mean, we know that, right? So, you know, part of the meaning of a slur is that it refers to a person, right? And hopefully with all this on. So what is a person? You know, something that has been born from parents. And so this kind of like information is somewhere there, right? And so I'm not sure if that makes it, I'm not sure if the same information can be recovered from a thin lexical entry. Maybe you're right. So maybe there's like there's no cutoff point, as it were. I'm actually not that bummed about this. So, you know, my main hypothesis here is that slurs are polysemous. And if you can explain polysemy by going the thin way, I'm also happy with that, right? I mean, it's important to me, it's polysemy. I think that's a view that hasn't been discussed much in the literature, so that's kind of like the new thing that I'm bringing. And I focused on the rich lexical theory because I happened to work with somebody who liked it, namely Agustin Vicente. And so, but I'm entirely open to see whether you can approach it from this other view. And, you know, if I get a better idea of the difference between these two, that will be very helpful for the project, yeah. But thanks, yeah, so it's a very unsatisfactory answer.
No, it's great, and I think you're right. I think the more your account is agnostic between thin and thick, the stronger the account is, because now it doesn't depend
Yeah.
If it only depends on features that might be common or shared between
Right.
those two approaches, then
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe I should sell it like this instead of like going directly for the rich one. Okay, well, now it's too late already. I already got the grant, so you're stuck with it. All right, sorry. Yes. Other questions?
I think I have two questions. The first one relates to the idea. I don't think like neutral terms or neutral slurs, or if they would hold against like cultural variance. I mean,
Cultural what?
variance, or in different contexts. Like, for example, a teacher. I can use some neutral terms to refer to an exam, but my students, they usually won't take lightly some neutral terms. For them, those neutral terms would be negative, because there's an expectation of like a bipolar between good and bad.
Can I say one little thing?
Yeah.
I don't think that slurs can be neutral. I just think that are neutral uses of slurs. I mean, they don't cease to be slurs, right? In my view, especially because in my view, the evaluative dimension is always there in the lexical meaning, right? But they can be, as many other words, they can be used in different ways, right? That's like a very small correction to what you're saying, right? But yeah, I mean.
And the other one would be in the case of like political, like reframing of the uses of the words. Like, for example, we have variances in the use of the word biscache in Portuguese, like in Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese. Like biscache is something like a gig here in Portugal. In Brazil is a slur for women.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And that will be a case of etymology.
Yes.
So I'm thinking if like in one of those uses or like appropriation of the words,
Yeah.
how the etymology and the political reframing relates to the community itself that is using the language, because usually the community is not like going to the etymology of the word like, oh, okay, that's a derogatory term. Or if there's some value to that or weight into your analysis.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm not sure I understand everything you said, but let me. So the second thing, of course, a slur is a slur for a certain community. There's no slur for everybody, right? It's just that, because now we have so much information, we understand that something is a slur is a completely different culture, and, maybe we don't use it. But you're completely right. I mean, the same word can be a slur in a certain, I mean, even if it's from the same language, right? It can be a slur in a certain community, in a certain country, something like that, and not a slur in a completely different country. Like even with, so Tsigan, in Romanian it's very easy because Tsigan is basically, you get fined if you use it. So it's a slur. I don't care what you say, it's a slur. You go to Spain, and very few people think that Gitano is a slur. They're like, oh, well, what do you mean? We use it all the time, and they themselves use it, and so on and so forth. So there's a complete, well, they're different words, right? But I mean, they should translate each other, right? So it really depends it really depends on the community a lot and the language, right? You also have these cases in which, so I think that's the case that I just mentioned. You have the case in which the translations of a slur in a different language doesn't have, either is not a slur or doesn't have the same kind of like force that it has, right? So, the N-word in the United States or the UK, absolutely unpronounceable if you're not from the right group. You go to Romania, it basically happens to be the same word that we use for black, and so your people use it all the time, and so sometimes they use it to address people of color by black, and it's not clear it's a slur, right? I mean, of course, there are certain uses that are obviously nasty, but it's not clear it's a slur. I don't know if that addresses some of the stuff that you said, the second part. Is that among, like...
Yeah, because I'm concerned in terms of, like, you see, like, Brazilians and Portuguese, like, migrants, and there's some confusion all the time between, like, when you're talking to some Portuguese and expressing like some ideas, sometimes they will be taken aback by something that you're saying that you're not at all. It's not
right.
you, it's not you don't like linguistically, it's not even a slur.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like the same language.
It's not polysemy, if that's what you're worried about. No, absolutely not, yeah. I mean, could be homonymy, could be what's the word, dialectal variation and so on and so forth, right? I mean, we have dialects, and yeah. So that's close to homonymy, right? Very close. So I don't think that's polysemy, no. At least I don't want to say that's polysemy. So you're completely right, yeah. I mean, you get this reaction precisely because it means, well, I mean, they are related, right? So,
yeah, because of the etymology of the word.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
yeah, so, yeah, okay, so that's interesting. I'm not entirely sure where to pin the difference, right? So it can be a bunch of things. But I don't want to say it's polysemy, right? Because they're not like different senses in this. Well, maybe they are. I'll shut up. I was like making problems for myself. But can you say the first thing again? I'm sorry. You had the first part of the question, or was it the same?
It was kind of
Okay.
going there.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry for not understanding quicker. Okay. Other questions?
I have a very quick, which is about the use of slurs in humor or
Yep.
in aesthetics in general. So, do you think your project can also,
Yeah.
or do you think it needs to be fit that kind of?
I mean, definitely should be. It will. Sorry, you should let it finish.
That's it.
Yeah. So, yeah. Thanks. I do think that it should be accounted for, right? I don't have a view about what happens when people use slurs in humor. I think this has, I mean, my kind of thought is, well, humor is fine, but you shouldn't punch down, right? Maybe this is something that should hold for all users of slurs. I don't know, but especially when you use such incendiary words and when you use such kind of like sensitive words, it's important in humor to be mindful of this power differential and what you kind of like permitting but with your use of a slur. But that's not semantics, I would say. I mean, it might influence semantics in a certain subtle way, but I don't think that's you don't, yeah. So I don't know if something changes in humor or irony. I would think that if you have that view, if you let's say attack some people by using slurs and you have this kind of principle that you only punch up, then that is I mean, I don't know if it's a fully non-derogatory use, but it's it's done with a good purpose, as it were. Right? Maybe, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, it's a very tricky issue, and I don't have a view. But you're right, I should consider more of this. I mean, Lovell Anderson has a bunch of stuff that he's written on racist humor and so on and so forth, so that's interesting too. If you're coming to the reading group, we can read some of that. Sorry.
I have one question that takes back on that. When you're trying to punch up someone, I was thinking kind of like in the idea of humankinds, because some slurs, they are part of like a broader social complex that tries to constrain what people can do and how they perceive themselves.
Yeah.
So would that be the case that in the conceptual structure that you presented, there's some way in which one of those items are related to that and constraining the horizon of the individual and how they perceive themselves?
I don't think that, as it stands, I don't think that's part of it. That might have to do, in uttering slurs, we're making speech acts, right? And they, as I guess you know from Austin, speech acts have all these effects, the illocutionary, perlocutionary, or something like that. So I think, a perlocutionary effect of an assertion, let's say, is something that happens to the hearer after they understand what type of speech act has been made, but it's not, related to the felicity condition of the speech act. So, if I say, I'm telling you, go fetch a chair, you recognize that that's a command, but it makes you sad because I dared asking you something like that, or angry or whatever. That's a perlocutionary effect. So I would put all these effects that you mentioned on that side, right? It's a kind of like it's a pragmatic issue. people have studied, of course, the effects that slurs have. I guess that's what you're going to, right? Yeah, towards. And so, it's overwhelming evidence that the effects are negative, and also there's some evidence that in appropriation the effects become positive and so on and so forth. But I don't think that's part of the semantics, right? And I don't think many people think that. Even people, so there's some people who work in the speech act framework, and they also think that's like a, as it were, later on effects that happen, right? So that would be my answer. I don't know how it would be to put in the semantics. That would be, I mean, that would really beef up the semantic a lot, yeah. And I'm a rich lexicon guy, but I want it to be, trying to make it as small as possible. But yeah, thanks. That's a good question.
Do we have any further questions? Okay, so maybe I'll ask.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Yes. Oh, you have a question too?
Okay.
What do you mean by units of information?
Oof.
And how do you define it?
Yeah.
Is a word? It's the word itself. The unit?
No. It's the word encapsulates some units information based on its meaning, right? That's kind of the idea. And so, what exactly is a unit of information? How an object looks like. It has, it's round, it's blue, it's whatever, the shape, the texture, or something like that. That's the type of unit of information that's the sense of unit of information that I have in mind, right? Another could be like, where does it come from? How did it come into existence? I mean, I don't have a definition. I mean, I have to go look through to Jack and Dorf and all these people who work on this kind of framework and see how they define it. I don't think it's probably very difficult to define. But yeah, I mean, aspects of certain objects that are semantically encoded or something like that. Semantically encoded in the meaning of the word that stands. Yeah. So basically, not the, you're kind of trying to, because that's what lexical semantic does. It tries to tear apart the meaning of a word, tear it apart and try to see whether there's like more basic stuff. And those are the qualia, right? That's what I understand the qualia. Not in the phenomenological sense. Yeah. But yeah, maybe I should have a definition for qualia. You're right. Thanks. More work from me then.
So I was just wondering what, in your view, if a slur a word that is used as a descriptor can turn into a slur, and if a slur can, through repeated use that is not derogatory, cease being a slur, or if, in your view, if a word is created in a community in order to derogate a certain group, it is forever to be considered a slur. Like, how would you?
May I add to that? With what if there were gestures, like he's asking, in terms of words that are descriptors and therefore used as slurs and vice versa? I'm asking. I wonder what you would suggest.
Can you repeat your question? I'm sorry, I didn't hear it properly.
I'm just curious about gestures.
Oh, gestures, right.
Because I wondered how, I wondered because of the transmission and therefore continuation of, the slurs. So just to add to his question of descriptors and slurs. I
feel there are different questions though, but they're both interesting, so I'm going to address both of them. So I don't think that the fact that, so I think that a word that is a slur and then not becoming a non-slur and the other way around, that's not, I mean, that's a fact, right? That's not something that theory would postulate. So that just happens, right? And the way how that happens, it might have to do with appropriation or might have to do with like some actions that the target group does or not. Some slurs might just like go out of fashion. Like nobody who uses Bosch anymore. They just went out of fashion, right? And so, except philosophers. Williamson actually started this with the Bosch, so he's to blame. So yeah, I mean, I can't oppose that because that's just a fact. I don't think that a semantic theory has to account for that. So I'm taking it, I guess, with many other people in the debate that, you know, a slur is a slur for a certain community at a certain time. And if it happens to be this time, well, okay, then there's all kinds of issues. Maybe we should mention it or be very careful, which might not necessarily all apply when it's a slur that has been in the past, right? So, yeah. So I mean, I don't think I have to have a view on that. I don't think I have to explain that. It's just something that sociologists, ethnologists, and you know all these interesting people that are not philosophers can give you much more interesting information about that. And you had a second question. I forgot what was it. No, you said the second.
Just the idea of whether they can change, right, or if they are always.
Oh, always, right. I mean, no, right? I mean, Bosch is not a slur anymore. Nobody cares. Used to be. Yeah. So, and also if you appropriate it, then at some point it's not going to be considered a slur anymore. I mean, well, the way I describe things is that you have a slur that is used appropriately, but you know, the aim of at least one of the aims of the appropriation process is that that thing is not a slur anymore. So therefore anybody can use it and so forth. Yeah, so that's it.
What would be the case, sorry, there was
jumping, you're jumping. No, if it's a follow-up, that's fine.
I think her question.
Yes, so gestures. I think that's a very good question. It's excellent. So I think, you know, the Nazi salute, right? That offends a lot of people. And so a lot of the effects that gestures have are similar to the ones slurs have, are similar to images, are similar to, you know, other ways that people communicate, right? So that's for sure. I wouldn't say that there are slurs because, you know, slurs are words, right? So you have to have a word for it to be a slur, right? And so it's not that only slurs have meaning, right? Gestures also have meaning, and other ways of communicating, images and so on and so forth, they have meaning as well, or meaning can be retrieved. But I think, you know, to be a slur, it has to be a word. So, yeah, it's interesting to study these things together because of the effects that they have and the harm that they could do. But I don't think gestures are slurs. And I want to make a remark. So I organized a conference this year, actually, and somebody presented a talk about whether odors you can slur by odors. So imagine that you have a colleague that you know, it's from a certain ethnic group, say, and they despise a certain odor, or they can't stand it, and then you bring that odor to the office and like put it in front of them. Is that a slurring act? I mean, maybe. I mean, you're producing some really horrible harms, right? That are similar to the ones that slurs. You could have called this person with a slur for the target group, but instead you chose to do this heinous act of bringing.
But I was thinking that's very similar to gestures because.
Right.
Well, I work with young children, and so instead of using the word that they've heard in households, they're using gestures among themselves, you know, because they know that the word is a slur or sometimes offensive, whichever it is.
Yeah, I mean, right.
And then we don't consider that gesture a slur.
But they get punished, right?
Well,
punished. I mean, you.
No, these are informal spaces. That's why that's why it's so niche. It's not a formal four-wall classroom space that I was working in at that time. So you know, it happens so fast. I'm sorry. I'm just bringing practical experience.
No, that's very good. Yeah.
It's not from so much of theory, you know.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. But these are the cases that we're very interested in as theoreticians. Like we love to.
It's eye contact, and it happens really quickly. And
right.
And
so
so I have to ask, what was that? Because these are construction sites.
And they're like nothing. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, but so. Thank you. Yeah. I think if it's so connected to a slur that basically replaces it, then it's just a way of saying the same thing, right? But yeah, I mean, it really depends on the context. If it's just you know, if it's just a gesture like the Nazi salute that has been somehow independently developed, I don't think it's like completely independent from whatever slurs they had for Jewish people, but I mean, you can make a difference, right, between the word and this gesture. But in the cases you mentioned, maybe not. Sorry, Tim. Yeah.
I just think, yeah, I think this is a really interesting kind of example of, for what it's worth. If you think of a case, this is complex for a gesture, but somebody who maybe pulls their eyes out in such a way as to make, you know, make it mirror an epithetical fold as a way of making fun of Asian people. That seems more slur-like in the sense of all it really does is call attention to that human category in a way that is supposed to make it an object of ridicule or shame. I think an odor, unless you told a really, really strange story about how the odor could be something that draws attention to somebody's human category, I think just an offensive odor just means you're a dick. It's not in itself a slur unless the odor was chosen in a way to highlight somebody's membership in a particular
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's the case. Like, you know, you have this person belongs to a certain ethnic group that, you know, usually eat a certain type of food or whatever, like, and that has a certain odor. And like, there's no context for you to bring that and put, you know, shove them in their face unless you want to do some, unless, I mean, of course, if they can agree and like you're bringing them a dish, that's fine. But like, if that's no previous agreement or something like that, sounds really fishy.
So there's nothing bad about the odor. It's just that the odor in itself isn't an unpleasant odor. It's an odor that's intended to draw attention to membership. Belonging.
And so you're slurring in a sense. I think it's, well, I don't know.
But I think gestures could be very, very much the same kind of
Yeah, so maybe it's a good idea to kind of like expand the definition of a slur and then see what happens. Like, my worry is that will take me 25 years.
No, you have to do all of these things. All of it.
I would love to have a grant for 25 years. That'd be amazing. But thanks both.
But both examples are behavioral. You can say it's behavior making a gesture and a linguistic behavior.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But then, you know, I would end up doing whatever. What's the branch of human activities that studies behavior? I guess. Yeah. You had something?
Maybe we can resume the discussion.
Well, thank you so much, all of you. Thanks so much. These are my email addresses. If you want to come to the reading group, just drop me a line. It's going to be on Fridays every 2 weeks. I think at 10 o'clock or something like that. And we don't have a room yet, but hopefully we will.
And you begin with what? Do you have idea?
Yes.